Good morning. Welcome to CAPRI. I'm delighted to see so many supporters with us here in Taipei, and greetings to our online audience. Every May, our annual forum allows us to showcase CAPRI's research priorities, provide a platform for diverse policy stakeholders to exchange ideas, and amplify Asia-Pacific's voices on resilience and innovation. 4 years ago, we inaugurated our annual forum to highlight the resilience of the Asia-Pacific in a world facing many interconnected challenges. The theme of today's forum, a little bit provocative, resilience, risk, and reinvention, reflects the profound changes underway in the world and the mounting challenges policymakers are facing to continue sustaining people's livelihoods, adapt to evolving technology, prepare and respond to disasters and health risks, and continue to focus on long-term challenges like climate change. To do this, policymakers need both diverse perspectives and actionable ideas, including the opportunity to brainstorm and learn from governments facing similar challenges. Professor Harry Harding and I conceived of CAPRI to bridge communication and research across the Asia-Pacific region and to convene leaders from government, academia, and industry to address complex challenges facing policymakers. Through comparative public policy research, CAPRI aims to strengthen global resilience and advance innovative policy solutions informed by the diverse experience of the region. Our initial research, as many of you know, was centered on health system resilience in partnership with the World Economic Forum. And we have completed reports on the health systems of Taiwan, South Korea, Malaysia, Singapore, and 3 Pacific Island countries. Our agenda has since expanded. CAPRI's programs today reflect the complexity and interdependence of the challenges facing the region, starting with energy. We just embarked on a 4-year research initiative investigating how policymakers across the region are balancing energy security, sustainability, equitable growth to effectively navigate the green energy transition. In CAPRI's spirit of building platforms for shared perspectives, we are fostering a region-wide network of leaders working to achieve these 3 goals in their own countries and collaborating across borders to build a more energy-resilient Asia-Pacific. At the same time, technological change is rapidly reshaping our world. CAPRI launched the Global Innovation Reimagined Trilateral Conference last year in Copenhagen, along with the University of Virginia and the Copenhagen Business School. From these discussions, we have published a volume with 15 commentaries focusing on policy outcomes. You can find all of our research on our website, including this volume. This series convenes experts and practitioners
from Asia, North America, and Europe
to explore innovative policy solutions to the world's most pressing challenges. Next month, we hold our 2nd trilateral in Tokyo with partners from Germany and the United States to consider how policymakers can leverage emerging technologies and AI to drive innovation while preserving societal resilience. The main focus, of course, of CAPRI. Our annual trilateral conference will create an intellectual community that can shape new policy thinking around innovation, competitiveness, and resilience worldwide. In the midst of these programs, we have also established CAPRI USA, an independent 501c3 registered in the United States whose mission is aligned with CAPRI's. CAPRI USA is a key partner, for example, of today's forum and of all of CAPRI's projects. As we approach our 5th anniversary next year, the importance of international collaboration, exchange, and research is becoming even clearer. Independent think tanks like ours facilitate the movement of ideas across borders and sectors. Education and talent development are central to this exchange. CAPRI supports fellowships for students and graduates from Princeton, Stanford, the University of Virginia, Northeastern University, and many more. We have supervised capstone projects for the Harvard Kennedy School and mentor younger students interested in public policy in Taiwan. And I see all of them are getting up early and just filed in to the right-hand side. We are very happy to see more than 100 students here today once again. Student engagement is integral to our work at CAPRI. You, on the right side, are each essential to building an ecosystem that generates independent policy thinking in this region that will make our world better. As Taiwan's international student population continues to grow post-pandemic, reaching more than 123,000, we value the opportunity to foster fresh global perspectives and new connections with new future policy leaders. In this spirit of global collaboration, I'm honored to introduce two individuals whose guidance and expertise have been instrumental to our founding: Professor Chen Jianren and José Manuel Barroso. Professor Chen Jianren will be providing special remarks after the keynote. He's a distinguished scientist and public servant, having led Taiwan through the SARS epidemic as health minister and through the COVID-19 pandemic as vice president. He was also appointed to the Pontifical Academy of Science by Pope Francis in 2021. As a member of our preparatory steering committee while we were part of the Reform for Resilience Commission, based in London, he helped define the vision of CAPRI as an independent, nonpartisan think tank, and he helped shape our research on vaccines in the Asia-Pacific. Since then, Professor Chen has continued to emphasize resilience for Taiwan in an increasingly uncertain global environment. His leadership and perspectives remain an important source of inspiration for our work. We also take the opportunity to congratulate Professor Chen Jianren on taking the mantle next month as president of Academia Sinica, Taiwan's most important research institution. Along with Professor Chen, our keynote speaker, Professor Barroso, was also a key driver of our initial research in 2021 on the triple challenge of COVID-19 vaccination, a report that, again, you could see on our website. As we examine the complex challenges of vaccine distribution, manufacturing, and rollout in the Asia-Pacific, Professor Barroso spent hours on the phone with me, explaining the successes and challenges he was facing as the chair of Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance. His insights shaped our recommendations, which he brought to the G20, G7, and the United Nations. Although this is Professor José Manuel Barroso's first visit to Taiwan, he has been part of us from the very beginning. In 2020, David Cameron and Tony Blair approached José Manuel Barroso and Malcolm Turnbull with the idea of bringing together policymakers, researchers, and private sector leaders to develop actionable solutions for strengthening societal resilience. They then invited me as a fellow Goldman Sachs alumna who had transitioned into the policy world to help assemble a network of leading voices from across Asia to contribute to this effort. With José and Malcolm's encouragement, I recruited Professor Chen and Acer's founder Stan Shi, who's also here today, to be commissioners and several advisors who could share the Asia-Pacific experience of resilience. And a year later, we took the leap to launch CAPRI in Taipei to focus on the interconnections among health, the environment, the economy, and innovation. Professor Barroso's career reflects his sustained commitment to international cooperation and institution building. As president of the European Commission from 2004 to 2014, he oversaw the expansion of the European Union from 15 to 28 member states and the implementation of the Treaty of Lisbon, which strengthened EU governance. He also received the Nobel Peace Prize on behalf of the European Union. Earlier, as Prime Minister of Portugal, he guided his country through a period of economic and political change, His work has consistently focused on building platforms for global dialogue and cross-sector coordination. Thanks to Professor Barroso, a Taipei-based think tank was founded and is now seen by the world. In a parallel sense, Taiwan also became known to the world because of the Portuguese, who named this island Ilha Formosa, the beautiful island, when they sailed by Taiwan's east coast in the 16th century. Formosa became a common name for Taiwan on early maps, but over time, Formosa took on deeper significance, becoming part of Taiwan's identity through successive colonial regimes and later a symbol in the democratization movement. Since then, the trajectories of Portugal and Taiwan have had much in common. Both emerged from decades of authoritarian rule to become vibrant, outward-looking democracies. And they are both advanced economies that actively contribute to the international community. We are grateful for Professor Barroso's continued support as a founding member of CAPRI's International Advisory Council, and it is a privilege to welcome him to Taiwan. Both Professor Chen and Professor Barroso exemplify the cross-sector, cross-regional collaboration that CAPRI seeks to facilitate, to build a more resilient world with ideas from Asia-Pacific. Today's event would not be possible without the support of leaders like them, as well as the dedication of our International Advisory Council, our board, our senior fellows, and the entire team. With that, it is my great pleasure to invite His Excellency, José Manuel Barroso, to deliver today's keynote remarks.
For your extremely kind words of welcome, Professor Chen, distinguished guests, excellencies, dear colleagues of the Advisory Council, dear members of the board, dear students, dear participants. It is, in fact, today obvious that we are living exceptional times. The world is going through great transformations. There are some discussions. Is it just a transition? Is it a rupture? But even if it's a transition, we don't know where to. So in fact, it becomes a rupture. The world, it's clear today, is becoming more volatile, polarized, fragmented, more complex and complicated, more unpredictable, and also more dangerous. And this is the result of some trends that we have seen since the financial crisis, the great financial sovereign debt crisis, but also the COVID-19 pandemic, and the geopolitical challenges, including the situations of war we have in the world. These trends have been, in fact, deepening, they have been enlarging, they have been amplifying, and they have been externally accelerated. Sometimes they are mutually reinforcing forces, and we see them, some of them are structural, like the demographic imbalances, including fertility imbalances that generate some demographic movements, including in terms of migration. Issues of sustainability, the climate and environment sustainability, and energy security crisis. Global power competition that is increasing and will only increase. Also, the scientific and technological revolution, and I underline the word revolution because indeed we are in the middle, or probably better, at the beginning of a real technological revolution, including in many areas that are for dual use, AI and other very important developments in this field. And if this was not sufficient, we have also recently, in terms of our democracy, seen what I call the change of the grammar of politics. I mean by that, the change of the principles and rules that make democratic politics. We have changed the way of communication, going not through the mainstream media, but bypassing the mainstream media, sometimes going against it. And also, all the conventions of diplomatic behavior are now being put in question by this change of the grammar of politics, not only in terms of communication, but also in terms of diplomacy. This shows that the conflictuality we have today in the world is not just among nations, but within nations that are becoming also more polarized. So all this adds to this complexity, and unpredictability of an already very difficult situation. This also is creating some levels of anxiety. So there is a psychological dimension on those matters. They may be structural, they may be economic, they may be environmental, but in fact they are also have a psychological dimension that generates anxiety, including the fueling of resentment. For me, resentment is one of the defining feelings of our age. An age today we have with some paradoxical evolution, because we have at the same time, because of all the photos, all the glamour of TikTok and others, we have today, we never had generations that got more photos than today. We have a mixture of seduction and glamour and fear. And that is fueling this sentiment, including the sentiment of resentment, that we see that some people try to mobilize against what we used to call the West, open societies and open economies. And all this was partly also triggered by the pandemic. Pandemic, as Shirley said, I was chairman of Gavi, the Global Alliance for Vaccines, and I watched it very closely. How this was taken by the governments of the world as a lesson to invest more in security, including economic security, because they saw how the supply chains were broken, and in fact, progressively replacing in economic terms a concept of efficiency by a concept of resilience. Today, governments all over the world, not only governments, companies, they are investing more in this resilience than probably in the old concept of efficiency, although, of course, they try to combine both. Resilience is, in fact, a very interesting concept that comes originally from physics, the stress of materials, and materials that come back to the status quo ante after some stress, but goes to psychology, including the trauma, when people go through some trauma and they have to recover their previous situation. And that is exactly that concept of resilience that was at the origin, as Shirley mentioned just now, of the initiative taken by some of us, including myself, to create that commission, Reform for Resilience, that was at the origin of CAPRI. And CAPRI was embracing since the beginning a concept of holistic understanding. So not just about public health, but linking public health with the environment, with financial and economic sustainability, and also other very important issues of this concept. So how can we address these issues today, those challenges that I've mentioned? There is what I call the 3 Ps, that's well known: promote, prepare, and partner. Promote your capabilities. For instance, in Taiwan, your leading position in the microprocessors, it's a great capability you have that is, there are no other in the world like you. All entities should promote their capabilities, but should also prepare, and I say prepare, not predict, because there is an illusion of prediction. In fact, instead of trying to predict the future, we cannot really predict the future. The future is open by nature. We can prepare for the different futures, plurality of futures, that we can. Who could have predicted, for instance, giving you some examples from Europe, who could have predicted Finland and NATO, Finland and Sweden in NATO? Just some days before the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, nobody predicted. Who could have predicted that Germany will change the constitution to allow for investments in defense without respect of the public debt? No one has predicted. But because of the actions of someone, a gentleman called Putin in Russia, it was his decision, everything changed. And so it shows that behind the trends, the structural trends, the actions of individual leaders, the decisions or lack of decisions of politicians can have an impact. And leadership, good or bad leadership, in fact, matters. And we should be attentive to that. So instead of predicting, we should at least prepare, but we should also partner, to have partners, to diversify our connections. And this is important today because, as we know today, it's a common sense to say that old globalization is over. I personally don't believe that we are in a process of deglobalization. I believe that we are in a process of reglobalization, where probably the new name of globalization is regionalization. And so it makes sense, to, instead of trying to have universal agreements like the ones we had before, in the time of old multilateralism, for instance, WTO agreement, in Marrakesh Treaty, that in fact I was, as foreign minister of my country, one of the signatories in 1995. There will be not these kind of treaties in the future, in the foreseeable future. Like we don't have, for instance, today any chance to have any other agreement universally accepted on climate change. So Kyoto or the climate agreement in Paris or Marrakesh will not come. This old multilateralism is for the time being dead because the United Nations are blocked. WTO, WHO, the climate agreement of Paris, they are blocked. And that reminds us that we have to find other ways that will probably not be the multilateralism, but what some people call the plurilateralism way, where regions are able to focus more. In Europe, we have this. I hope, and this is also happening today here in Asia-Pacific region, but I also hope that we can build cross-region initiatives, like, by the way, what we have achieved recently in terms of trade. So the reality is that in spite of all those forces I've mentioned, for protectionism, or for nativism, or for isolationism, we are seeing very interesting developments. Trade is being very resilient. In fact, trade is growing in spite of all negative forces against trade and all forces of protectionism. In fact, we are seeing that science and technology continue to expand. There is one good thing about science and technologies, is that governments cannot control it because they are more linked to the intelligence of people. So in fact, there are forces that will continue to be determinant, even if they are not, and sometimes they are under threat. This is why I really believe that for some global public goods, like public health, like climate protection, we need institutions that are able, in a new creative way, to find ways of convergence. Like Gavi has done it. Gavi is now commemorated its 25 years. It's in fact an international organization, but it's a foundation. It's a public-private partnership where we have the governments, but we also have there the pharmaceutical companies and research institutes, and also NGOs, and also other contributors to this common goal. So that's what CAPRI also is. CAPRI is also a very interesting institution. We have a precious institution here in this region, trying to build in an original way a convergence of people from the public and private sector, independent, this is important, but also having this Asia-Pacific impact and this Asia-Pacific nature. So, and also trying to mobilize public and private forces. So I really believe that the future for global cooperation is to some extent through public-private partnerships with variable geometry, focusing on very important issues for the common public good. And of course, above all, this is education, education, and education, and science and innovation. And knowledge. Knowledge is not about information, as a professor of mine in the US said many years ago. Knowledge is sometimes the process by which you delete useless information. We have to be able to try to understand the world in this amount of incredible information that we receive every day, and also with a quality that I like to underline that it's not very often mentioned, and sometimes is underestimated, is the quality of imagination. Another form of intelligence. And sometimes here, humans are still very important at the head of artificial intelligence because algorithms are better in the rational prediction, or what they try to do as prediction, than imagination and creativity. So we need that imagination to imagine the futures, and futures that are good for mankind. I know mankind is a very complex concept, and I will end with this remark. Today is not very popular, at least in Europe, to quote Russian authors or Russian literature, but I love Russian literature. And a great writer from Russia, Dostoevsky, in one of his books called Karamazov Brothers, he says, "My father loved mankind in general, but he hated every person in particular." So this is not the kind of mankind I refer, not a statistic, abstract concept of mankind, no. Mankind, every man, every woman, every child. This is more important than any state, any party, any ideology, or any other concept. Every person, the dignity of every human being. And I believe that if we focus on that, we can achieve great things for that mankind, but not an abstract quality of mankind, but a concrete concept of mankind made of men, women, and children. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Professor Barroso. You may now return to your seat.
Dr. Chen, the stage is now yours.
Professor Barroso, Professor Lin, distinguished council members, and distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is really a great pleasure to reunite with Professor Barroso and Professor Shirley Lin at CAPRI. During the COVID-19 pandemic, I had the privilege of working with Professor Barroso and Professor Lin to set up CAPRI as part of the London-based Reform for Resilience Commission. The commission brought together leaders from the government, industry, and academia at a critical moment when the world was reeling from the global COVID-19 pandemic. I joined the group because its mission was not only to assess the global response to the pandemic, but also generate forward-looking recommendations that can advance resilience across health, economy, and environment. This was an important effort to break down silos and recognize that these challenges are deeply interconnected. At that time, it was clear to me that Taiwan and the broader Asian Pacific region had an important leadership role to play. Our experiences demonstrate how societies can respond effectively to complex overlapping crises and how lessons from the pandemic could inform more integrated approaches to resilience well beyond public health. I would also like to extend my sincere gratitude to Professor Barroso for speaking in the COVID-19 conference organized by Pontifical Academy of Sciences in 2021, where he touched on the diverse experience of countries around the world facing vaccine challenges during the pandemic. And his talk always very inspiring and very brilliant and very smart, just as today's keynote speech. And today, I am very encouraged to see how CAPRI's work continues through the efforts of José, Sherry, and all the experts and stakeholders who have contributed to the organization's growth. This spirit of collaboration is essential in today's rapidly changing world, with CAPRI serving as a platform for research and dialogue on how societies can build resilience. CAPRI serving as a platform and very important role, and the foundation led by the Global Commission has helped make CAPRI possible, and I am proud to see its growth into an influential, non-governmental, and international think tank. Later this year, Academia Sinica would like to invite Professor Barroso to deliver a lecture for the Taiwan Bridges Program, an academic exchange initiative that brings Nobel laureates to Taiwan for high-level discussion between international scientific leaders and Taiwan's academic community. With that, I would like to welcome Professor Barroso and all the distinguished speakers to Taiwan. And thank you all for you have done to advance global collaboration for a more resilient world. With that, I would like to best wishes for a very successful forum, and best wish everybody have very enjoyable stay here. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. First of all, welcome to the panel, Rewriting the Innovation Playbook Amid Fragmentation. Thank you, CAPRI and Shirley, for inviting me to moderate the discussion. and it's great to hear from Vice President Chen Jianren and also President Barroso just now. I think President Barroso talked about the challenges when it comes to the change of the grammar and the principles and rules of politics these days. It's a very timely commentary ahead of the Trump-Xi meeting next week. But I think I'll need to stick to the topic I'm assigned to, which is about the innovation playbook. As global fragmentation reshapes markets and supply chains, competitiveness has re-emerged as a strategic priority across the Asia-Pacific region. Meanwhile, technological advancement and artificial intelligence, AI, are also unlocking new frontiers for innovation, industry, and investments. So in this session, our three experts will discuss whether national strategies can accelerate innovation, workforce transformation, and greener growth despite the myriad of challenges. And I think I'll start with the first opening question, the same one to all the panelists, and perhaps I would just put that to Professor Thurbin to kick off with. The global economic order is facing new uncertainties, prompting many countries to place greater emphasis on supply chain resilience and technology security. So in your respective country, what strategies are being deployed to respond to these changes and to strengthen competitiveness?
Thank you, Thompson, and thank you to the CAPRI team. It's such an honour to be here among such distinguished panellists and such a joy to be back in Taiwan. Yes, the existing crisis, I think, exposes, it's really symptomatic of a broader reality about the existing fossil-fuelled economic order and the inherent risks involved in that economic order. We know that ongoing reliance on finite fossil fuels for our energy needs is an insecurity multiplier. It exposes us to energy insecurity, to economic insecurity, to social insecurity, geostrategic insecurity, and that's before you get to the environmental insecurity. So this crisis is just symptomatic of that bigger reality. And the countries that emerge in the strongest way from this crisis will be the countries that act on another reality, and that is that the green energy transition can be a national security multiplier. It can boost energy security by reducing that reliance on imported fossil fuels. We can manufacture our own energy security. It will boost economic security by building and scaling the new technology and innovation-intensive industries of the future, the export-oriented industries of the future. It will boost environmental security by reducing particulate pollution and addressing climate change. It will boost social security, especially by creating new green jobs, and in countries like my own, creating opportunities for community ownership of renewable energy projects, for Indigenous ownership of renewable energy projects, and it will boost geostrategic security as countries seize the opportunity, and this is crucial, to be a better green development partner for other emerging countries, helping them leapfrog the more destructive fossil fuel order and move straight into a more secure energy future. But this is obviously a huge opportunity. It's a national security enhancing opportunity, but it's an innovation challenge. And it's not just a challenge of technological innovation or policy innovation, it's a challenge of governance innovation. How do we use the energy transition and govern the energy transition to promote this comprehensive national security enhancing agenda? And again, the countries that will emerge strongest out of this crisis will put their mind to that governance innovation challenge.
Thank you, Professor Thurbin. I think you made a very timely point about energy, given all of us being affected by the war in the Middle East. And now perhaps we can move on to Professor Park. Professor Park, could you perhaps touch upon about the strategies being deployed in Korea to cope with the changes and in terms of competitiveness?
Okay, thank you very much. As Professor Barroso addressed this morning at his keynote, We are living through a more fragmented global economy with growing pressure toward decoupling. But the real world is far more complex. Interdependence does not disappear. It has to be reconfigured. This logic applies here in Taiwan, perhaps even more sharply. Taiwan is facing the wave of decoupling more directly than almost any other economy. In advanced technology, the pressure of regulation control and strategic alignment is already very intense. Korea also demonstrates this complexity quite clearly. Korean firms use and further develop many technologies with origins in the United States. At the same time, China remains a major market, a manufacturing base, and part of the industrial value chain. Korea also depends on China for a range of lower value-added but industrially essential inputs, such as urea or other components and materials. Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix both operate semiconductor facilities in China at Nanjing, Wuxi, and Xi'an. These facilities are deeply affected by United States export controls. Advanced equipment cannot simply be introduced without regulatory clearance, and the constraints are real. And as long as Korean firms rely on technologies and systems shaped by the United States, there are limits to how far they can escape these pressures. And also, artificial intelligence adds another layer. The two major engines of the AI revolution are the US and China, as you know. Korea, Taiwan, and Japan are more closely aligned with the US-oriented AI ecosystem. For reasons of security, safety standards, and regulatory trust, it is not easy for them to fully utilize Chinese AI models. But China's influence in AI, particularly in open source components, is clearly growing. It may be easy to say that economies with shared values should cooperate more closely. It is also easy to say that supply chains should be reorganized around geopolitical blocks. But simple decoupling or a simple dichotomy between the US and China is not compatible with industrial competitiveness. The real task is the deliberate reconfiguration of interdependence among the affected economies, reducing one-sided dependencies while preserving the connections that sustain innovation, production, and economic growth. This requires governments, industries, and the policy community like CAPRI to work closely together. And this is also where Lee's point on green innovation and energy transition becomes very relevant. These areas may be less politically charged than semiconductors or AI, but they are no less strategic. They may offer space for new forms of cooperation across the blocks. I suggest that the new playbook should be the deliberate reconfiguration of interdependence. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Park. And now we'll turn to Director Xu on Taiwan's strategies in terms of changes, shifts, and competitiveness.
Yeah. Thank you very much, first of all, for having me here. To answer this question, I think the first thing is we need to understand the situation and also the challenges facing Taiwan in the global context. More uncertainty and more escalating geopolitical tension. And Taiwan is an export-oriented, small and open economy, lacking in natural resources and also positioned at the epicenter of the US-China rivalry or competition. And that put Taiwan particularly disproportionately vulnerable to all these shocks, including increasing trade protection, China's intensifying military and economic coercion, U.S.-China trade war, and also U.S. unilateral trade measures. So, and also natural disasters, and also energy crisis, such as the situation right now in the Strait of Hormuz. And over the past years, and also currently, Taiwan has faced a series of crises, including COVID-19 pandemic, as just mentioned by the previous speakers. And all this have made Taiwan pre-examine and pre-assess the meaning of resilience. And Taiwan has not let these crises go to waste and has reopened and responded by leveraging all these pressures to make Taiwan economy more resilient. For example, Taiwan has been totally relying on Chinese economy for almost 4 decades. Around 80% of Taiwan's our investment goes to China. And around 45% of Taiwan's export also went to China at its peak. And after a few years of de-risking and also diversification, and right now Taiwan's our investment and also supply chain partnership with other countries as well as export market right now are more diversified across the globe. And furthermore, Taiwan, to safeguard Taiwan's national core technology, which right now is Taiwan's core competence and also our national strength. Taiwanese government in the past year have reviewed and amended a series of very important legislation related to national security and also economic security. That includes the amended National Security Act and also a series of intellectual property rights related legislation. And however, some challenges still remain unsolved. One is right now is being increasingly discussed in Taiwan is that while Taiwan holds a dominant global position in advanced semiconductor and also high-tech manufacturing, and it's been found and discussed that this dominance in a single sector right now is absorbing a lot of natural resources, government attention, and also it's make traditional sectors such as textile, footwear, and also machinery being more difficult in terms of competing for workers, for example, talents, for example, with the high-tech sector. And we understand that all these traditional sectors hire more than 80% of Taiwan's total employment, and they makes a very important issues for our national security. So all this are right now the current situation, and not to mention that next week Xi Jinping and also Trump are going to meet, and they may have some new development that may affect Taiwan. So I think all this we still have to keep an eye on and then learning from our experiences to deal with the current and new developments. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Xu. You talked about all sorts of shocks Taiwan's facing and how it has been building economic resilience. And also, my question now builds on what you just said about the dominance of AI and how it affects the broader economy. Taiwan's semiconductor industry is seen as a very strong example of an effective industrial policy. To what extent can it sustain the competitiveness, and what lessons can Taiwan draw from this semiconductor success to strengthen its approach towards other critical and emerging industries such as drones, robotics, and AI-driven sectors?
Yes, thank you, Val, for this question. Can the semiconductor industry in Taiwan sustain Taiwan's competitiveness? To a significant extent, yes, but it's facing increasing challenges. Taiwan, as you mentioned, currently controls more than 90% of the world's advanced semiconductor production. And this dominance right now is sustained by massive capital expenditure and also the creation of an ecosystem the ecosystem's hyper-clustering effect is something that cannot be duplicated, at least in the next few years or even next decade. This is something that we should be proud of. However, as you mentioned, that right now there is a major concern that the semiconductor sector has become so dominant that it absorbs the best engineering talent, as I just mentioned, consumes a massive share of the energy and making it very, very difficult for other sectors, including other manufacturing sectors and also services sector. And furthermore, TSMC, together with its key suppliers, right now moving fastly to the US and also Japan, and probably the next destination will be Dresden or other European country, are giving a lot of new concerns for Taiwan. So I think all these have to be addressed. And as for this model can be adopted for emerging industry, right now the government is actually adopting the same model to emerging industry. As take a drone sector, for example, the government is now investing heavily not only in research institution, in talent development, but also in AI development, and also related sectors, including components, including infrastructure, and also including everything that could support the development of drone. And in addition to this model, the government right now is considering that individual small drone startups will not be able to compete with big players in global market. So the government is facilitating a formation of a national team. So this national team aiming to build Taiwanese-made or Taiwanese-built components or supply chain and integrated. And this right now has something that is very important, because this, what we call the clean supply chain or the non-China supply chain right now becomes a selling point for US and also European defense markets. So I think this is the industrial policy and also the experiences right now adopting into new sectors.
Thank you. Now we'll turn to Professor Park. Professor Park, for Taiwan, Japan, and South Korea, there are significant opportunities for collaboration in emerging technologies, yet competition among the three remains intense. How does South Korea balance cooperation versus competition, and how does its innovation strategy stand out compared to the other two?
Well, thank you for a very interesting question. The question frames this as a balance between cooperation and competition. But I would frame it slightly differently, complementarity. TSMC dominates advanced logic. Samsung and SK Hynix lead in memory. Hyundai Motor Company is emerging in physical AI. These are not simply companies competing for the same customers. They are nodes in the same network. Between Taiwan and Japan, TSMC's Kumamoto fab shows a deepening link between Taiwan's semiconductor capabilities and Japan's industrial base. Between Korea and Japan, materials, components, and equipment continue to create important industrial linkages. Between Korea and Taiwan, the relationship is less about direct competition than about complementary positions in the AI hardware value chain. The United States is another connecting layer. TSMC's Arizona Phoenix investment, Korean semiconductor and battery investment, and Japanese investment in batteries and advanced manufacturing are all being pulled into this framework. So the three economies are connected not only directly with one another, but also through the emerging industrial policy architecture of the United States. Cooperation among these three economies is therefore already structural. Competition still exists, but it is not a zero-sum competition to replace one another. So I would not describe the future of Korea, Taiwan, and Japan simply as cooperation or competition. It is complementary specialization, with each economy competing to perform its own role in the value chain with greater excellence.
Thanks, Professor Park. Now we'll go back to Professor Thurban. Professor, Australia has positioned the green transition as a pillar of its broader strategy for competitiveness. Given we have seen the conversation changing so much in different parts of the world, is it possible for governments to still deliver green growth, given the climate we have now, and sort of talks about trade-offs between sustainability and other public policy priorities?
Thank you. That's an excellent question. And I think that there is a real risk in these moments of energy crisis that we do start to think about trade-offs, about energy security, and we think about, we've relied for so long on fossil fuels for that energy security, and that it's somehow incompatible. The shift to renewable energy is somehow incompatible with energy security. But actually, if we look at, for example, the country that has built the world's largest renewable energy system, for example, which of course is China, we understand that the Chinese government has not been motivated to do that for environmental reasons. We see China investing so enormously in building and scaling the world's largest renewable energy system for energy security purposes. These are mutually reinforcing goals. And in Australia, this comes back to this question of complementarity. So in Australia, while of course there is so much to be gained from cooperation technologically between Japan and Korea and Taiwan, I would love to bring Australia into that picture because we have an incredible advantage in cheap renewable energy. We can produce the world's cheapest electricity with our abundant wind, solar, capabilities. And if we bring that into this picture of synergy and cooperation with Northeast Asia, we can be a crucial partner in continued economic competitiveness by helping to decarbonise some of these really hard to abate but crucially economically important industries like steel, like aviation fuel, for example, through the production say, for example, of green iron in Australia, and then us exporting embodied decarbonisation to Japan and Korea and Taiwan in the form of green iron. And that is good for Australia and it's good for the region. So I think while it might be tempting in this time of crisis to think of energy and environmental security as somehow not complementary, they are actually highly complementary. But the question is, what kind of statecraft is this going to demand of us as middle powers to bring on these new economic opportunities? Of course, in the first stage, they're hugely capital intensive, and there's the problem of the green premium. So there's a really crucial question for countries like Japan, Korea, Taiwan, and Australia to say, what does it look like to collaborate on building and scaling, on creating these markets through shared standards, through collaborating on offtake, through collaborating on synchronising our mandates, say, for example, for sustainable aviation fuel. This is a really different kind of statecraft than was demanded in the fossil fuel era, and I think it's a really crucial area of cooperation.
Thank you, Professor Thurban. We have some time left before the closing round, so I would like to ask if Professor Park or Director Xu would like to perhaps share how South Korea or Taiwan are approaching their own debate over the green transition or the whole energy security debate.
I'll make it very short. Before our panel started, I talked with Liz at the seat, And then I mentioned about the hydrogen energy. So one example is Korean steel company, POSCO, approached Australia to make a collaboration in the field of hydrogen energy to produce green hydrogen in Australia with renewable sources. And then POSCO tries very hard to make it possible to import green hydrogen from Australia to Korea. However, the transportation of liquid hydrogen is very hard, very difficult. So in that case, POSCO may produce their steel in Australia, like a green steel you mentioned, and then transport the green iron to Korea to process more into kind of steels or the panels. So definitely Australia will be a very good partner in the Asia-Pacific region in terms of the green transition. I strongly agree with you.
Thanks. And Director Xu, I mean, you talked about drones and new industries. I mean, AI needs energy, drones require energy. So how is Taiwan approaching the whole debate?
Yes, I think most of you may know that the year 2026 is a very crucial year for both green transition and also digital transition for Taiwan. Starting from this month, the government officially collects the carbon fee, starting with around 500 or less than around 450 the so-called large emitters. And so that is something that is right now very important for the whole industry. And you just mentioned about this AI. In Taiwan, same as other country right now, has already entered the AI, massive AI boom. That means the government and the industry right now are building AI data centers everywhere. So this means that on the one hand, the society is asking for less carbon, but on the other hand, the AI is consuming more electricity. So that kind of debate right now has been serving. And another issue is about this green transition, because of, and this has been discussed for many years, and because of the outbreaks of the conflict in Middle East and the situation of the Strait of Hormuz. And Taiwan is supposed to be impacted hugely because most of our imported, we import more than 90% of our total energy. And most of our, the oil and also the LNG imported through the strait. So Taiwan should have been targeted, affected because of this. However, because of AI boom, so last year we registered 8% of economic growth rate unseen for 15 years. And then this quarter, the first quarter, we registered 13% of growth rate, unseen for 4 decades. So this economic prosperity does not mean that we are away or immune from this energy crisis. So we do hope that they, despite of this very good performance, is still very urgent that people, government, and private sector will have to sit down and discuss not to slow down the green transition as well as the digital transition.
Thanks. And I think on that note, we'll come to the concluding question for everyone. I mean, all three of you spoke about a whole range of technology shifts and challenges in the policy debate. Transformative technologies, particularly in AI that some of you have alluded to, are creating new investment opportunities while also reshaping labor markets and economic structures. I mean, Taiwan's a good example, as Director Xu talked about, how it's affecting service and traditional manufacturing sectors. So my question is, how are policymakers leveraging these changes while preparing the workforce and traditional industries for potential shocks ahead? So I think I'll put that to Professor Thurban first and then turn to Professor Park.
Thank you so much. And yes, I think this issue of data centres is really crucial. And when it comes to AI, it really should be born green. Data centres should be born green. And again, here we have the opportunity in Australia to fuel the data centres with renewable energy. And that is but one. So in Australia, we have the Future Made in Australia agenda, and it really does articulate a vision for Australia, a fantastic vision for Australia as a supplier of green commodities, and for Northeast Asia in particular, around green iron, around sustainable aviation fuel. It's a fantastic vision. But of course it has enormous challenges in execution. At the moment we have any range of green iron projects standing ready to go, but the policy suite is very challenging because of the green premium. So we're thinking about particular policy innovations in Australia, for example, through a clean commodities trading initiative, where the government could act as an off-taker for green iron, committing to buy a certain volume of green iron at a certain price over a certain period, and that would provide the project with the confidence it needs to raise the finance and move forward. And then to deal with the green premium, you could separate the physical commodity from the environmental attribute and then sell the iron at regular prices, and the government can bank and trade the clean commodity certificates. Now, this is a way in which the Australian government could actually earn money back for supporting industry. But there would also be, for example, an opportunity to collaborate with Taiwan, with Korea, with Japan on such an initiative, whereby we could share the risks of the offtakes and then the rewards of creating a market for the trading clean commodity certificates. You could apply that to sustainable aviation fuel as well. So these are the kinds of sophisticated middle power statecraft that I think are going to be essential, the governance innovations to turning these incredible ambitions that we all have into reality.
Thank you, Professor. Professor Park, can I also put the similar question to you about how our decision makers in Seoul leveraging the changes and preparing for the potential shocks?
Yeah, the question is about the AI and the shock to the labor market, and this question is like a buzz question. Everyone is talking about it. I would like to approach AI from the perspective of economic growth and industrial transformation. AI will change the demand for labor and the skills individual workers need. That is obvious. At the individual level, people will have to think hard about what capabilities allow them to remain relevant. But at the national level, the key question is growth. Without sustained growth, it becomes much harder to sustain employment. AI does not simply replace traditional industries. AI itself cannot produce tangible goods. But when traditional industries are transformed through AI, they can reach a new level of competitiveness. That is industrial AX. Korea, Taiwan, and Japan are exceptionally well positioned for this. They have deep manufacturing capabilities, strong IT ecosystems, and years of investment in digital transformation. And AI can continue the trend. So AX is not a leap into the unknown. It is the next step on a path already underway. If AX raises manufacturing competitiveness and helps sustain growth, then it does not mean that millions of jobs will simply disappear. More likely, many jobs will change within a more productive and more competitive industrial base. These three economies are not victims of AI. They can be the winners of the AX competition.
Thank you, Professor Park. I think you made a very good point about the how AI could be cannot replace traditional industries, but could transform jobs and the challenges. I was recently in the southern port city of Kaohsiung, where I was interviewing hotel owners and hostel owners, and they said, look, AI can't help us clean the room, but it can transform how we run the business and market ourselves to the world. Last but not least, I'd like to turn to Director Xu on how Taiwan's dealing with all the range of shifts and also preparing for its population.
I think Taiwan, Korea are having the similar situation. We all enter into the AI boom, the AI era, but the impacts or the benefits are unevenly felt across different industry, different sectors, and also different job types. Taiwan is an aging society. Also, we have serious labor shortage. So the AI adoption is very much welcome in some sectors, especially in manufacturing sector. They being eager for more worker and more workforce. However, for a small and medium-sized company, and because they may not have AI talents, they may not have a digital infrastructure, and therefore, this smaller and medium-sized company may be adversely affected, and this will affect their productivity, which again will widen the gap between the performance of small and medium-sized company with the large company. So I think for the government needs to pay attention, because we have one of the world's best high-tech sector. I mean, they are all buying 100% green electricity. Whenever they go invest in other countries, they are asking for 100% green electricity, and they are not considering to slow down because of all kinds of headwinds, for example. But for traditional sectors and also for smaller company, and this needs more government support and more government supports to help them to be able equally benefit from the AI development.
Thank you, Director Xu. A quick roundup. Once again, I think Professor Park, thanks for your points about the complementarity between Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan, how AI doesn't replace traditional industries, but change jobs and how industries function, and how for all Japan, Korea, and Taiwan across the board, AI, the traditional strengths in AI, IT, and manufacturing capabilities mean that AI isn't a leap into the unknown, and jobs won't disappear overnight, but instead will be changed significantly. And of course, for Director Xu, you pointed out a whole range of issues facing Taiwan, from the dominance of chips and the challenges it brings to the broader economy, the energy transition Taiwan's facing, in particular the milestones this year with the carbon fee collection, and the emergence of new industries such as drones, and what Taiwan can draw lessons from the earlier success. And of course, last but not least, from Professor Thurbin, pointing out the importance of charting an energy secure future, on suggestions on green commodities that Australia's pushing for, and how renewable energy is tied to the conversation about energy security as well, so it's not an either-or situation, and how all these transitions might require good governance and good statecraft, as well as international and regional collaboration in order to pull off. So on that note, let's thank our panelists again today and give them a round of applause.
Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Guangying Liu. I'm with Commonwealth Magazine, 天下杂志. So we're celebrating our 45th anniversary this year. And yeah, so I guess you could say that we are resilient, in the words of Mr. Barroso. So thank you guys for staying for the second energy panel discussion of today. I think the energy security is such an important issue that it's really on everyone's mind. And so to open today's panel discussion, I would like to say that what's the biggest challenge for Taiwan, Japan, and Korea? It's powering the most powerful semiconductor and AI facilities, while also trying to hit net zero targets and facing difficult pressures. So I'm also happy to bring people's attention to the 4-year research initiative that CAPRI has embarked on. They are going to partner with researchers across Asia Pacific, including those in Australia, Japan, Indonesia, the Philippines, among others. There's a long list. Sorry, I cannot memorize it. But today, I'm really honored to be joined by such distinguished panelists, and I would like to start today's discussion with something that's really on everyone's mind. So, as an energy reporter for over 10 years, I always struggling to try to find the best way to cover energy, because people know that in Taiwan, especially, the topic of energy is highly polarizing, because sometimes it's not entirely scientific, most of the time it's political, but most importantly, it's very economical. And so the first very challenging question I would like to pose to our panelists, and first I would like to start with Ali to give us a more global view. And the first question is, how are governments and industries prioritizing the tensions between equitable growth, energy security, and decarbonization? Where do you see the most difficult trade-offs emerging today? So please, Ali.
Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I really appreciate the kind opportunity. So jumping directly to addressing your question, let me first begin by highlighting the positive points we are already in the world. Over the last 20 years, we've seen investment in deployment of energy transition grow from just about $60 billion back in 2005 to over $2.3 trillion last year. And the result of that is all the technologies that we need for decarbonizing the energy economy, for about 75% of global emissions, we already have them. And more importantly, they're already affordable if we have the right regulatory framework. And then when it comes to the third component of the energy trilemma that you pointed out around energy security, as in the first panel, Professor Thornburn very eloquently already highlighted, because these technologies lower the dependence on the need to import fossil fuels, they actually strengthen energy security. Yes, there are some areas that are very challenging, and I'm sure we're going to hear, for example, from Henry around challenges in specific sectors. But by and large, from a technological perspective, we've already made significant progress. To give you some examples, not from developed economies, but more importantly from emerging economies. For example, in 2022, after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, LNG prices globally went through the roof. That meant Pakistan couldn't afford to buy more LNG. What happened? The result of that was a lot of the corporate companies in Pakistan started deploying solar because it was affordable and they could get power. More recently, we've seen Ethiopia ban the sales of internal combustion engine vehicles to be able to accelerate EV adoption, to lower dependence on spending of its relatively limited foreign currency reserves on buying petroleum products to import. So the energy trilemma is being balanced, but the trade-off is, do we have the political willingness to undertake reforms needed to accelerate the deployment of these technologies? And on that front, I'll conclude with highlighting the EU third energy package that was actually passed during Professor Barroso's term as the European Commission presidency. The challenge is we need to undertake reforms that allows the energy system to transition, and this can be politically difficult because there are certainly negative impacts on incumbents.
Thank you, Ali, for giving us the global perspective. And next, I would like to turn to Mika to give us the Japanese perspective on the most difficult trade-offs of energy transition.
Okay, thank you, Kwanzi, for the introduction. And then I'm really pleasure to be here as a panel. I think the discussion about the green transition in Japan and Asia Pacific has already changed years ago. It is no longer only about climate, but it is about energy security, industrial competitiveness, and economic resilience in that area. In that sense, investment in renewables, energy efficiency, batteries, and power grid is a strategy to strengthen energy independence and resilience. The most difficult challenge is balancing short-term price stability with long-term structural transition. This is especially difficult for energy-intensive industries such as steel, chemicals, and semiconductors, which must reduce emissions while remaining globally competitive. That is why we first need to maximize energy efficiency, electrification, renewable electricity procurement, and process optimization. And then technologies like hydrogen and CCS should be focused only on sectors where there are very limited alternatives. I also think it is important to recognize that the main bottleneck today is not technology itself. The cost of solar wind batteries are falling very rapidly. The real challenge is institutional. As Ari said, that the trade-off is the political will to go for the transition. The transition is being slowed by limited grid capacity, delays in grid connections, slow permitting processes, lack of long-term investment certainty, and outdated electricity market design. Over the past few years, more than 90% of new power capacity added globally has been variable renewable energy, mainly solar and wind. Asia is following that trend. The technology that are expanding fastest today and will continue to expand over the next decade. The key question is how we can integrate these technologies into the market and power system at scale. And for that, institutional reform is essential.
Thank you, Mika. And next, I would like to turn to Mr. Kim for the perspective from South Korea.
Well, thank you. It's really honor and pleasure to join as a panel for this forum. And let me start with the policy objective you mentioned, like equitable growth, energy security, and also decarbonization. All three sit at the core of any serious economic agenda today, and none can be easily sacrificed. So I would like to slightly reframe the question. The real challenge is not simply which to prioritize, but how much weight, how much speed we assign to each. So because in practice, these objectives pull against one another in very concrete ways. So carbon pricing accelerates decarbonization, but raises costs. Localizing supply chains builds resilience, but reduces efficiency. The fossil fuel investment secures near-term supply, but creates potential stranded asset risk. So for Korea, these tensions are not abstract at all. We import roughly more than 90% of our primary energy, while running an economy built on electricity-intensive exports, including semiconductors, steel, and also petrochemicals, etc. And we have committed to ambitious emissions target in line with global norms. So the trilemma is not a policy choice for us. It is the structural condition within which every decision has to be made. And what makes this trade-off so difficult is that they are not at root technical problems, in my view. They are problems of value. For instance, what is the true social cost of energy poverty? What is the true social and environmental cost of delayed decarbonization? And how do we price the long-term risk of stranded fossil fuel assets? Without answers to the questions like this, investment decisions remain simply guesswork, and policy ends up reacting to crisis rather than shaping the energy transition issue. This is where some of the most useful work is happening at the boundary of the public and private sectors. And SK Group, one of the Korean conglomerate with its business portfolio that spans semiconductors, energy, bio, telecommunication, and AI, we have been developing a framework called DBL, double bottom line. And DBL is the systematic measurement of both financial returns and social value as well, integrated directly into investment decision making. In practice, this means assigning explicit value to emissions reduced, to environmental externalities, and to broader social outcomes. For example, by assigning a quantified value to each ton of carbon reduced and incorporating it directly into capital allocation. Just for more details, this brochure is placed over the table, and also the soft copy will be sent to you by email, and that includes our DBL framework, formulas, and several case studies, including our collaborative work with SASAC in China too. So to come back to the question, these trade-offs cannot be eliminated, but they can be managed far better than they currently are if value is properly measured, properly priced, and properly reflected in financial decision. So let me stop here.
Thank you, Mr. Kim. And last but not least, I'm very happy to see an industrialist among the speakers. I will have Henry tackle the question.
First of all, also thank you very much for having me here. I think as the only one who is in the heavy industry. From Taiwan, if you think about the energy policy in the last 10 years, I want to recite a slogan that came up 10 years ago, first in Chinese, and I'll translate. Very simple, was what we were going to do is 非核、减煤、增气、展绿. Okay, maybe some of you remember all this. What this means is we're going to reduce using coal, we're going to increase gas, we're going to phase out nuclear completely, and then we're going to ramp up renewable energy, namely wind and solar. Now, under this big umbrella, the hydrocarbon basically still remains, of course, the largest portion, 80% of Taiwan's energy, or more. And at that time, it seems like we were going to use renewable energy to replace nuclear. Hence, I think Guangyin mentioned that this issue become very political and polarized in Taiwan. Kind of set off a camp of people who were very pro-nuclear against a camp who was very pro-renewable energy. Because, of course, people who are against nuclear fuels, there's still a lot of safety issues. We don't have solutions to nuclear waste. People against renewables, this is still very intermittent, but also the cost is very high. But 10 years later, I think like Ali said, with a lot of the positive investments, the cost of, I would not say all, but some of the renewable energy is actually now very cost competitive. I remember 20 years ago when we looked at, investing in possibly in a solar project. Basically, we were looking for a subsidy price from the government at about starting at 10 NT per kilowatt hour. But now, there are a lot of people basically would invest in themselves because it's already cost competitive. So if you look at the issue we lay out here, energy security and green transition, I would say nuclear and renewable energy actually should be in the same camp. They both help in energy security and in green transition. So we should try to develop this as much as possible and try to reduce the hydrocarbon. Therefore, I don't think there's much sort of tension in this trade-off from this very high level. I'll stop here for now.
Thank you, Henry. So I also support the all of the above approach. But then I have this one particular question for Henry, because you're an industrialist, and Donghe Steel is one of Taiwan's most important and largest steel maker. So a particularly challenging question would be, how do you balance the goal of decarbonization while maintaining national security, because steel industry is very crucial for resilience and national security?
Well, Guan Yin, thank you for asking this. I think in the green transition, while we're mostly talking about source of energy and electricity, to achieve the decarbonization and green transition, actually all the heavy industries should carry its load, namely steel, aluminum, oil refining, fertilizer, cement. These are the industries, actually, as you all know, the European Union are at the most forward in asking these industries to buy carbon credits and also set up CBAM systems to protect these industries in this transition process. So these industries, if they could be more efficient in its energy use, it actually is already helping a lot in this green transition process. Much more than when we ask you to turn off your lights, maybe turn up the temperature in your air conditioner. These industries can actually do a lot. But since this is a think tank, and I think we should think big and think out of the box. But in the picture of green transition, how could we rearrange these industries, from the mining all the way to its consumer, in a way that helps this process? This is very different from today. If you think about national security, obviously every country would like to have its own industry in the most complete way. What I mean is that if I have the iron ore myself or any kind of oil well, and then I can have the smelting or the refinery, and then I have the downstream applications, and then I can help the whole economy grow. That is the most ideal situation for national security. And I think China actually has done the best in developing all this. You all know that they have the most rare earth capability, not only in the mines, but have even greater smelting capability. So they take ore from outside and process them in their country. Okay? So in this sense, for the large industries, the national security versus green transition is, I think, in a conflict. So it's very hard for us to now, I think that in an earlier panel, and I did talk to Liz earlier, maybe we should make all the steel in Australia and then just, ship them to Northeast Asia for further processing. That's actually probably the most green way, because we'd be transporting probably 1 billion tons of material less. Because for transporting iron ore, for example, to make 1 ton of steel in Taiwan, you need to transport 1.6 tons of iron ore from Australia, plus another 0.7 tons of coking coal. That's 2.3 tons. But if we make it there in Australia, immediately we're shipping a lot less. And this is actually the biggest seaborne trade for bulk carrier in the world. And just by doing that, is already a lot of decarbonization. However, this is a very big challenge because will we give up our steel industry? You know, we would not be able to make very special steel when we want to develop certain parts in a drone, or we want to make some special parts in a new nuclear plant. So I think this is something that us as a think tank to really further explore in this coming study.
Yeah, thank you, Henry. I think this warrants a separate panel discussion on the dilemma between decarbonization and national security because, right, carbon emissions don't vote. So what's best for the world's decarbonization is not necessarily the best solution for individual countries. So, right, that's really a very difficult question to answer. But the next question will be for Mr. Kim. So we keep hearing that the costs of renewable energy, especially solar, are becoming lower and lower, and it's becoming more affordable. So then from an investor's perspective, I would like you to maybe talk to us about why there are still a lot of difficulties and what are the risks that still make green energy project difficult to scale. And how does a policy or regulatory condition make these investments financially sustainable? What's the solution?
I don't know if I can provide a solution for that, but thank you very much for the question. From an investor's perspective, the constraint of green energy investment today is not a shortage of capital. I think it is a shortage of better or more bankable opportunities, means opportunities with returns predictable enough to deploy capital at scale. So the question is fundamentally how policy and market design shape risk. And let me focus on two conditions. The first one is policy stability. So investors need confidence that the rules under which a project was financed will still hold 5, 10, 15 years ahead. And let me also share one of the experience that I had. Korean battery companies, including LG and SK, committed a significant capital in the United States based on a clear long-term policy signal. But when that signal shifted, particularly with Trump administration uncertainty around IRA, Inflation Reaction Act incentives, those investment assumptions began to break down. And when policy predictability weakens, even well-founded investment stall. Not because the underlying economics changed, but because the risk-adjusted return did. And second one is pricing future value. The many critical investments in the energy transition do not generate immediate, fully monetizable returns. Their value lies in future and in the emissions they will reduce, in the technologies they will enable, and in the risks they will help avoid. But today, that future value is largely invisible to markets, and when value is not priced, it won't be financed. So to the question becomes, how do we bring forward the value of future carbon abatement into today's investment decisions? One potential answer lies in forward-looking mechanism where expected emissions reductions from emerging technologies can be quantified, valued, and transacted in advance. This is a bit different from ETS, the current system. And this allows capital to flow today against the future impact, enabling companies to be valued not only on the current cash flows, but on their expected contribution to decarbonization. In other words, we move from ex post compensation to pricing those outcomes in advance. This is the logic behind so-called outcome-based funding, means financing outcomes that are measured, verified, and priced in advance. And so also, let me also introduce another initiative, which was initiated by Chairman Choi Tae-won at SK Group. And that is a new framework called EPC. I feel like I'm a kind of bookseller or the leaflet seller, but
so call this number if you're interested.
This brochure, this leaflet is also placed on the table, and EPC means environmental progress credit, and it seeks to assign a tradable, verified value to future carbon abatement. It seeks to verify emissions reductions, quantify them, price them in advance, and turn them into a tradable asset. In other words, it makes future social value visible to capital markets today. And ultimately, without mechanism like this, without the ability to measure, price, and bring forward future value, capital will not flow at the scale this transition requires, regardless of how far the technology advances. Let me stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kim. So it looks like new financial and pricing models are really necessary to accelerate the transition that we all wanted. And so next question would be for Mika. And I think this is also a topic that has been brought up many times today, which is nuclear power. Could be a sensitive topic, but what's interesting is I myself was just in Tokyo in March and was very surprised to see that 15 years after the Fukushima Daiichi incident, Japan is now seems to be restarting many of its nuclear reactors. So after such a very visible crisis, how is the Japanese society balancing fear and maybe need for energy security, and what's really happening in Japan?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. But I just want to confirm the numbers, because before the Fukushima Daiichi accident, that we had the 54 reactors in Japan. But now the government successfully, open the restarting the nuclear is, I think, the 14 reactors, with all efforts of restarting. So it's not the many reactors. So it is true that public attitudes and the current administration policy toward nuclear are changing in Japan, but it is important to understand what is behind this shift. This is not necessarily a rapid expansion of support for nuclear power. It is more a growing passive acceptance of nuclear as a practical option and the concerns about energy security and rising electricity prices. Japanese government has shifted from a policy of reducing dependence on nuclear energy toward maximum use of nuclear power. That discussion now includes extending reactor operations and new construction of reactors. But there is still a large gap between the policy message and the reality of the energy system and the market reactions. First, nuclear power faces a serious time challenge. Even restarting existing reactors has been slow, and building new reactors would take more than 20 years. So it is extremely difficult for nuclear to play a major role in emission reductions or stable electricity supply by 2030. That's the challenges. The government understands this situation, so that 20% of nuclear by 2040 is the maximum idea that included in the energy plan. What matters for energy security and climate security agency is not only whether the technology is theoretically zero emission, but how quickly it can actually be deployed within the next decade. Second, there is the issue of cost. Across Asia, the cost of solar, wind, and batteries are falling rapidly. At the same time, nuclear power faces growing uncertainty because of higher safety costs, construction delays, and rising financing costs. Third, there is the issue of industrial competitiveness. Many Japanese companies, especially RE100 companies and export-oriented industries, increasingly need large amounts of renewable electricity procurement. Sectors such as semiconductors, data centers, automobiles, and chemicals are under growing pressure to procure low-carbon electricity. At the same time, Japan's biggest bottleneck is not technology, but institutions, limited grid capacity, weak investment, weak regional connections, grid access restrictions, renewable curtailment, long environmental assessment, and complex permitting processes are slowing renewable deployment. Japan is not constrained by lack of technology. It is constrained by the slow pace of institutional reform. So I do not think the issue should be framed as a simple choice between nuclear and renewables. More important question is how to redesign the power system, and the key challenge is how to build a more distributed and flexible energy system. Some countries are discussing nuclear power or LNG in the name of energy security, but in reality, a renewable-based system that reduces dependence on imported fuels becomes the realistic energy security strategy, lowering costs and increasing self-sufficiency. This is already happening in European countries. Portugal, for example, together with Spain, is becoming a strong leading case of how the green transition can improve energy independence by reducing reliance on imported fossil fuels. The rapid expansion of variable renewables and hydropower has helped reduce exposure to fossil fuel price shocks, while also highlighting the importance of investment in grids and storage. And I think that is really the core issue of the green transition in Japan and in Asia Pacific.
Thank you, Mika. So I know that our other panelists probably, if you also want to respond to the issue of nuclear energy, so does anyone would like to maybe add a few words? So as you probably already know that the restarting of nuclear reactors is also a hot topic here in Taiwan, because the decision seems to have been made that the reactor 2 and 3 are going to be restarted, and if they do, it will maybe make up to 6 to 8% of Taiwan's baseload power supply. Does anyone want? Okay, so Henry, please.
I jump into this, and it looks like I'm pro-nuclear now, but I just want to say, given the experience of very polarized in the last, 10 years, I think it's to encourage people who are involved, whether from, government to private sector to academia, to be very open-minded about all these developments. The safety around nuclear has improved a lot. There's new technologies in, like molten salt, nuclear reactors. There's SMR. All these things are still in the distance, but it's something that we will be able to benefit in the future with much lower reduced risk. And so to be very, very open-minded and learn as much as possible through this process, as opposed to, no nuclear in Taiwan, so we're not going to learn anything about this. I think that's very important for Taiwan going forward. As we are, like Guang Ying said, we're reopening, number 2 and number 3 reactors. In the process, I'm sure we're going to make it much more safe.
Thank you, Henry, for your contribution. And my next question would be for Ali. So you're from BNEF, and I would like you to maybe talk about the rapid green transition that's happening in China. So I think everyone is also very paying close attention to China's advancement in green technologies, because it's really reshaping regional, maybe global energy markets as well with the green supply chain. So how should Asian economies respond to both the opportunities and maybe risks posed by China's green supply chain?
Thank you very much. Let me first start by just explaining the current state of China's advancement in energy transition. So since 2013, China has been the single largest market globally in investing in deployment of energy transition technologies. I mentioned at the beginning that last year, globally, the investment was about $2.3 trillion US. China was 800 billion, by far way ahead of any other market. As a share of GDP, China's investment was about 4.5%. The next most advanced is the EU as a whole, which is only about 2.2% as a share of GDP. Here in Taiwan, that number was only 1.2% as a share of GDP. So China has done significant advancement in deployment, and as Henry also mentioned, in the entire value chain for production of the equipment as well. Now, as Professor Thornburn also mentioned in the first panel, the reasons behind this are not exclusively because of climate change. The first primary reason that China has embarked on this journey is really from energy security perspective. If we go back to the turn of this century, at that point, China was somewhat still self-sufficient in its energy needs, and its reliance on fossil fuel imports were fairly limited. But as its economy grew, it became actually the largest buyer of oil, and actually increasingly now even LNG. And to mitigate this energy security risk, the government decided that it should prioritize deployment of indigenous resources. That includes renewables, nuclear, but also coal, as well as on the demand side, electrify more and more share of the economy to reduce the need for imports of fossil fuels. The second thing was around industrial competitiveness. China recognized that these are the industries of the future. It did not take an ideological view, as we've seen, unfortunately, in some political parties in Western democracies. Rather, it said, we want to be able to have the ability to export more technologies globally. This seems to be growing industries, so why not invest in these growing areas? And the final one was more about the local pollution, less about CO2, but more about political stability associated with satisfaction of people in terms of when it comes to air and water and soil pollution. The Communist Party is very, very attuned to any sort of discourses around disgruntled people. And if you look at statistics around protests in China, over the last 2 decades, most of the protests are actually tied into these sort of local nuances around air, soil, and water pollution. A lot less to do with political structure. Now, to get to the crux of the question that you're asking, so China has become now the world's largest manufacturer of these technologies, and it's increasingly posing a challenge to other countries that would like to have these industries as well. And here, I would like to echo Professor Barroso's 3 Ps around looking at, for each economy, they should really think carefully about, okay, what are their current industrial advantages? Are there areas that they still can promote and remain competitive? And of course, for those, pursue those. Are there areas that they can look at, for example, partnering with China? Yes, a lot of economies are concerned about the significant advancements that China has had, but these can also be an advantage. So I'll give you two concrete examples. Solar modules, okay? This is an industry where globally the manufacturing capacity is more than 4 times what the current demand is. In fact, we have enough manufacturing capacity that we could accelerate deployment to be aligned with a Paris Agreement trajectory. So for any economy, as we've seen unfortunately in the case of Japan or Taiwan, to say that, no, we want to prioritize producing modules domestically, which by the way is a passive component, it doesn't have any communication element, from an economic competitive perspective is very, very challenging. On the other hand, when it comes to inverters or PCS, so for example, this is an area where Taiwan has leading manufacturers. Delta Electronics is one of those. So these are where you could be much more strategic and you could say, okay, we're going to prioritize that localization. So there's a bit of a balance in terms of taking advantage of the improvements in cost and scale that China has made, while at the same time protecting domestic industry. The difficulty here is that what we've seen is many governments have a very knee-jerk reaction where they put in local content requirements where the scale of their domestic economy can't really support. There are some good examples of local content requirements. Again, with the wind sector, for example, Brazil is one of the biggest successes globally, but it worked because it had a large enough of a market. If you look at the offshore wind industry here in Taiwan, the local content requirements that the government put in actually, maybe saying the word kill is too extreme, but it pretty much did. And maybe linking this back to your nuclear question, one of the difficulties here in Taiwan is, as Henry mentioned those slogans earlier, Taiwan met its nuclear phase-out goal, but it didn't meet its renewables goals. And part of the reason it didn't meet the renewables goals was actually going back to these sort of decisions around industrial competitiveness. The last thing I'll say is, for policymakers, it's really critical to distinguish between capital goods and consumables. When it comes to energy security, one of the big problems is that a lot of policymakers either intentionally or unintentionally conflate these two things. Having an import dependence on solar modules from China is very different than having an import dependence on LNG and oil from the Hormuz Strait. Even if you're Japan that can manufacture its own gas turbines, that gas turbine is going to need LNG imports for its entire lifetime. But if you import solar modules from China, once you've installed that, you have your domestic energy security. This is something that when it comes to this debate, a lot of time politicians like to conflate it. Those two things are not the same.
Thank you, Ali. So very, very great points we should all consider. So we are short on time, but I would like to ask each of the panelists to tell us what's the most fundamental institutional change you would like to see over the next 5 to 10 years for the green transition to take root. So Mika, may I start with you?
I think the most critical institutional change that have to be happen in over next 5 to 10 years is the redesign energy system around cheap energy source, which is renewables at the core, not as a supplementary power source. That technology is already exist. We need much larger investment in grids, storage, flexibility, and demand-side management, together with predictable long-term policies that can mobilize private capital. To achieve this, regional collaboration will be essential in Asia-Pacific. For example, Taiwan has become a leader in offshore wind development, and there is strong potential to build more cooperative regional supply chain, including with South Korea, in areas which as vessel operations and related infrastructure. The question is, if future generation has to invest again in those technology and institutions after a decade, why we don't do it now?
Thank you, Mika. Strong message. So, Mr. Kim?
Let me close with one thought. Over the past roughly 2 decades, energy transition, renewable energy has been driven largely by technological plus operational progress. The falling cost in solar, wind, and batteries we can see. In fact, solar and wind equipment manufacturing has become largely commoditized, as Wang Yin and also Henry mentioned. And if I look back, yes, the Q-Cell, that was the #1 player in Europe and globe 20 years ago, merged with Korean company Hanwha, but you cannot find the name at the top 10 list. And 10 years ago, Suntech, Inli, Chinese #1, 2 player, disappeared. And all the top 10 players are mostly Chinese. They don't make money because it's commoditized. And this trend will continue. The next phase will be defined less by technology and more by our ability to measure value, to price it, and to make it investable at scale. So the real question is whether our financial system, our pricing mechanism, our risk-sharing structure, and our investment frameworks are capable of deploying it at the speed and scale required. And to conclude, I don't know, when you enter the airport yesterday or before, I don't know how many people, the foreigner, used the APEC business travel card, which was introduced back in 1996 and introduced by Australia, Philippines, and Korea, 3 countries, and now expanded to, I don't know, 20 countries. So I introduced a bit conceptual and provocative idea about DBL and also EPC today, and I hope that we can find a more collaboration opportunity together to do a more in-depth analysis and introduce this system for our future together. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Kim. So, Henry, what's the change you would like to see?
I don't know about change, but one of the major concerns I have in terms of Taiwan's green transition right now is we have a very ambitious goal on offshore wind, I think like Mika has mentioned. But the fact is, I don't think these projects on an overall scale is actually going very well. For example, each round of bidding, there was originally maybe 5 or 6 winners to develop these offshore wind farms. As far as I know, in each of the 3.1, 3.2 round right now, there's only 2 developers left. And I think it largely has to do with the financing problem that you all mentioned, around renewable energy. The costs, yes, over the last 20 years is coming down, but it's not a straight line. I think with a lot of people fighting to complete these things in 2030, maybe Taiwan, Korea, Japan, all fighting for that same boat to install the wind turbine tower. So you jack up the price. We together jack up the price. And so then it's not cost effective anymore. So these things, at the same time, along with things that Ali mentioned, we all want local content. We want, as low as possible, the FIT takeoff price. These things all contribute to a lot of problems in these developments. So I would say we want to see that these projects can really smoothly deliver renewable energy for Taiwan, in the next 5 years.
Thank you, Henry. So I don't know about you, but I really enjoy these discussions. I feel like I'm really happy to have energy nerds with us. But I think Mika wants to have last word.
Just a kind of 30 seconds responding to what he said. Because we are on the same board, Taiwan, Korea, Japan. So we need a regional collaboration. Successful case in Europe is not only single country or single investment or single developer can create the cheaper offshore wind case. That is the good competition all over Europe. They take the role each other. So the Japan can collaborate with other countries, the cooperation, supply chains, and then reduce the cost of renewables.
Thank you, Mika. And I think, Ali, you have 30 seconds.
All right. So very quick for Taiwan. If Taiwan wants to meet its emission reduction and balanced energy trilemma, there's two things that are really critical. Electricity market reform. Unless Taipower's current structure is not changed, you're not going to meet your goals. Apologies for being blunt, but that's the way it is. Second one, land use reform. Land use policy needs to be grounded in science, not nostalgia, misinformation, and benefits to the few at the expense of the majority.
Thank you, Ali. I think we have a consensus that really energy transition requires all of the board and really all hands together. Also, we need fundamental institutional change. And I think, Mika, a great reminder that regional cooperation is what we need urgently right now. So please give a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you so much for sticking with us. So this is the third panel. The title is Translating Science into Policy and Social Trust. Well, before we start our conversation, I would like to extend my gratitude for Shirley, for CAPRI to host this event, for this timely conversation. So as we know, CAPRI really is about making policy recommendation. But we also know that policy cannot be truly effective without good communication. And that's what this panel really is about. While scientific information is still instrumental for policy making, policy formation, I think it really takes good communication to mobilize the society, to garner the public support. We are in a time that we are seeing growing crisis in public trust, right? I think scientific information is very much politicized, questioned, and a lot of times filtered through competing media narratives and online ecosystem. So for a policy to be truly effective, how can we use effective communication strategy to make the information itself not only understandable, but also credible and actionable? I think that's what this conversation really is about. And we kind of like exchanged some ideas last night over dinner, so I know this is gonna be a fun conversation. So for my two panelists, so honored to be with you for this conversation. I think I'm gonna start with a broad question to start our conversation. So Dr. Pottinger, you are based in the United States. Dr. Ma, you are based in Taiwan. In both societies, I think we are seeing rising political polarization and fragmented information environment. From your individual perspective, how have these changes affected public trust in scientific information, scientific institution? And are there any noticeable differences in how trust is built, challenged, and maintained across different societies? I think we can start with Dr. Pottinger.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having us. Shirley, we're delighted to be back. If we could answer this question, we'll be ready for the next pandemic. Unfortunately, to say that we do not have all the answers for this. I would say that public health mistrust has always been there, right? It's just that our polarization and the fragmentization is accelerating this distrust and bringing more people under the umbrella who may not have been distrustful before, but because we're getting all of this media out and everyone's living in their own reality depending on how they consume media and the news and how they, what they're looking at on TikTok and Facebook and Instagram, that policy directed at an entire population is very difficult now, right? We have all these people with differing views, and I would say a lot of policymakers have this notion if you just put out a message that you're going to hope it's going to translate to these different subgroups. And we're using, in a 21st century media infrastructure, we're still using 20th century communications strategies, and it's not going to work. It's not going to work going forward, and we're not going to achieve what we're hoped to achieve by getting people to really follow public health policy in a way that protects you and me and everyone else. Societal differences, I think it really comes down to institutional trust. We all know that after living through COVID, that trust takes a very long time to build, right? Years and years of credible information, but it's so easy to lose it when it happens. And we all saw that with COVID. And when scientific policy is associated with a political group, it's not good for any of us, right? Especially, let's take, for example, of course, the mask wearing. I know you all have trauma the instant you hear about mask wearing. At least those in the US do, right? Because it's associated with, oh, you must be a Democrat if you're wearing a mask. But let's say you're a Republican and you want to wear a mask, all of a sudden you're betraying your kind. Do you know what I mean? So like we have to get away from the politicization of policy that affects everybody. But when politicians become scientific experts and scientific experts become politicians, it's a losing scenario for us.
So I think you're saying that, scientific information is highly politicized, and we are all living in our all information bubble, echo chambers, so it is really hard to break through. Dr. Ma, are you seeing the same thing in Taiwan?
Exactly. So, well, I couldn't agree more with Ian's comments on that. I think also yesterday we have a lot of discussion about current days, the news comes so fast. And it moves so fast, the scientific understanding couldn't catch up at all, right? It's actually have no time for science to build the evidence or to explain what's going on, or people couldn't really want to listen to what we are going to say or anything. So what I see is to build a public trust, we have to build this before the crisis, right? Not during the crisis, because during the crisis, people just have so many information that kind of all the bomb of the news, and you are kind of chasing by all these informations. But how to build this public trust beforehand, that's how we scientists or scientific institutions should do. And I think the same thing in US and in Taiwan, well, I should say before, but I hope also still, scientific institutions are viewed as a neutral and authoritative agency or institution. Then for this, I think it's very important to build a very grounded scientific truth. Of course, in science, it's really difficult to say truth, but the uncertainties, we couldn't really answer all the questions, but we have to provide the information with uncertainties, with transparency. We talk about earthquake, talk about risk. Whenever I say risk, I talk about earthquake risk, so pardon me for that. So for the risk, I always say there's always a lot of uncertainty. Also, the issue we just addressed about nuclear power plants, that was a debate 10 years ago, or even now still. We have to face some risk, but how can we really communicate this risk from a scientific background? And scientific knowledge is also limited, so we have to be honest. But once this information was taken in a political view, that makes things really complicated. So everyone look at the scientific evidence in different perspective. In the same time, is also the institution, how can really stay neutral, and then also bring your grounded truth or your knowledge, and keep this communication with general public, with media, and that's actually very important. Before the crisis, we actually continue to bring this long-term trust by communication, and also to talk to the press. And sometimes social media is very difficult to control, but somehow the news or the press is still important to deliver our knowledge in a very optimistic way. So for me, I would say to build our public trust is a long-term maintenance, and it's built on our scientific grounded truth. Thank you.
If I could just add to that, I think this is a clear distinction between Taiwan and the US. You talked about building institutional communication structure that can sustain political changes. In the US, we are moving farther and farther away from that, frankly, right? We have RFK Jr. talking about his MAHA movement and vaccines and, changing the childhood vaccine schedule with a group of people who have no expertise in this just because they all agree with him. So in the US, we are not building institutional communication structures in our public health policy. And I would say it's even more polarized now than even in the first Trump administration, because he's put in charge a man who is not a scientist, who's not a medical doctor, but is promoting, I'll just call it fake science. And our FDA is not approving very important drugs that are for rare diseases, and going against the scientists who recommend approval. We are not in a fact-based society in the US. It's not guiding our public health policy at the moment. And there does seem to be a slight shift. I think it's not going over that well with the public, with the measles outbreak, all these things that are happening that the public is starting to push back against. And you can see the change in the new CDC. I mean, he's a temporary acting director, but that there is some acknowledgement in the administration that maybe the public isn't all on board with the MAHA movement. And so it's a little, you can see the society differences, at least with Taiwan and in the US. We're moving a little farther away from where scientists would like to be. And sorry, I'm gonna just add one more thing. As I was thinking through this health communications, this bridge, the divide really between politicians and scientists. Scientists make terrible communicators. They don't teach this to us. Right? Like I would say the majority of scientists are actually terrible communicators to the public. They have a really hard time translating their very technical work. You're agreeing with me. Technical work into something that most people can understand. It's a very nuanced way of communicating. And they should really start teaching this in universities as part of science programs. And I think CAPRI here should have a role in this, right? Like we should do a whole discussion about what does a course look like for teaching this, for teaching scientists really how to communicate. I promise you, they teach statistics, they teach all sorts of things, but communication is definitely not one of them.
I feel like that comment very much addressed my second question for you, which is what we learned from COVID-19 pandemic management and the legacy of it. So I think I can move on and asking Dr. Ma, your observation specifically in Taiwan, where your expertise is in earthquake awareness, preparedness. Earthquake, typhoon, natural disasters is basically just part of our everyday life. So what are the biggest challenges that you are seeing in keeping this disaster awareness on public agenda when the society otherwise is very much preoccupied by other political, economic issues? How do you keep those awareness alive and then the society ready to respond, address such issue?
Thank you. Well, I keep kind of reply to Ian's comments, and the reason why we choose science most of is because we don't want to talk. That's why we choose science in the first place. But then, I mean, as earthquake scientists, as our moderator was saying, earthquake, typhoon, flooding are daily life in Taiwan. Every year we have to meet this challenge. And the biggest shock, we learned hard lessons in Taiwan. The biggest shock for me is 1999 Jeju earthquake. I just got my PhD, earthquake science before, is in computing. It's all the data I download from the computer and I do the simulation, and that's it. Until 1999 Jeju earthquake occurred, I was shocked. I was in Hsinchu. Whenever people ask me as a seismologist, I feel terrified by earthquakes. Of course, I'm a human being as well, right? But for the earthquake, the second day I went to the field, and I was shocked by what I see. And I realized what I learned In science, it's not like physics, chemistry, or mathematics. It's something related to the society. I have to do the job with the communication. And to understand that Taiwan actually has the fact that this occurs once every 20, 30 years for extreme ones, right? And after 1999, we have 2016 Melon earthquake, 2018 Hualien, 2022 Taitung. I apologize, I remember all the years. 2024 Hualien earthquake. I just mentioned the other day about this Taroko and how region hotel did so well for the people during this earthquake. And so from that, we started to learn that we need to communicate with people. And so we also, for science, we should develop, now people know about earthquake early warning. How can we really bring the science into practice, right? Earthquake early warning is one of the important products to somehow, and in the beginning, people also feel like, how can I do with that 3 seconds? Well, you can actually protect yourself in 3 seconds, but the other thing, important thing is the infrastructure, right? The gas pipeline, we can shut down the gas, the high-speed rail, the MRT, now it's become in practice. Okay, so that's one of the things. The other thing I would like to mention is also about the risk for earthquake scenario. As earlier the keynote speaker, Professor Barroso mentioned about, we couldn't do prediction. I'm sorry, I keep put everything into earthquakes. We couldn't do earthquake prediction. So whenever I enter US, and then people, they will ask me, so what is your expertise? I say, I do earthquake studies. So they will say, okay, so when will be the next earthquake in California? And I often say, well, anytime. And they say, oh, you come to the right place in California. I say, well, you've never been to Taiwan. We have more. We couldn't do earthquake prediction, but we can do preparation. And that's how we do. We do earthquake scenario. Like for Taipei Basin, we have Sanjiao Fault. With all the exposure, how can we do the scenario to see, once it happens, what's the weak points in our society? And so we have a better building code, and also we bring this to industry partners to somehow also the extreme events, the contingency for industry, and also continuation of the business. That's very important as well. And also for the high tech, we say like, well, Taiwan is a high tech. We have all the earthquakes as well. How can we reduce the impact of next large earthquake to the industry partner and to our very important economic partner? So that's what we've been doing. And I think in science, in the past couple decades, I tried to link science to engineer and also the policy making. And I'm glad our government actually somehow come up with our idea and then have a good policy making to assure our preparation for our next big one. Thank you.
That must be nice.
It is nice. Thank you, Dr. Ma. So last question before we end this conversation. Looking ahead, I believe technology will continue to play a role in policy communication. So we are seeing the role of social media and increasingly AI. From your perspective, do you feel like these new technology is helping policy communication in a way that reduce the complexity of the issue, engage the audience, or do you feel like they are risking the the essence of the issue itself?
You want me to start? So I think we're presented with actually an opportunity, and I think that that's a viewpoint that maybe we need to really embrace, which is that the generative AI and the social media, if we can train our public health people to really become literate in, producing videos, messaging, in the same way that the people who are trying to produce videos that, is about false information, we can get ahead of the message rather than chasing debunking videos and really pre-bunk, right? To put out messages and allow our messages to get across. I mean, when I was at CEC, to get anything approved to be put out takes forever. If you want to publish a paper, it will take you sometimes upward of a year to get your paper out because there's so many levels of approval. Well, we need to change this notion in our institutions to be able to really combat and meet the moment of social media. We always talk about how social media is bad for our society, but why not think of ways to make it good and useful and informative? and not just chasing down, oh, you know, this person said this. And the good and bad thing about social media is that it democratized information and science for people, right? Like, think about COVID. All of a sudden, people were talking about genetic mutations and replication models of viruses and reading preprint journal articles that no one ever did before, right? That was really a good thing. We had a lot of positives come out of COVID. We had wastewater surveillance now is used globally. We have a lot of surveillance detection methods, but we can also use the moment, the social media and all of that to really get our message across if our institutions can shift and become more, you know, rather than be reactive, to be proactive in our messaging.
Perfect. Dr. Ma?
Well, I would say AI really saves us a lot of time and really efficient. And I enjoy so much of cloud AI. I don't know whether any one of you do coding. It's like, I just, in the new year, I was trying to give some data. I said, give me this cross correlation function, and then they just wrote the code in 5 seconds. I was like, oh, wow. Okay, so AI really bring a lot of, you know, save our time and efficiency. But in the same time, we all know that they simplify the problems. Well, it's always pros and cons. So in the same time, it can actually bring this complexity of science into simple form that, as we talk about communication, so people can understand what we are doing. But in the same time, as we also say, like, because they simplify the problem, so people adopt this idea and they don't change. However, we know our knowledge changes with time, and even with, if we're talking about the time of the crisis, during the crisis, the information also changes with time. And that is really difficult to change their mindset because that's what they read or what AI feed them. So again, as bringing to the very first question about the public trust, or to say, how can we trust the information in AI? But AI needs training data, right? Right? So we need to bring in more data and also, well, scientific base to train AI into a better form. In the same time, to bring in the message of uncertainty. I know uncertainty is so difficult to communicate because usually people will ask me yes or no. Or earlier we talked about nuclear power plants. A lot of risk, concern about an earthquake, and also the death war. So they often say, well, yes or no, but we know in the society or in the science, there's no zero risk. It's how we manage that. So compared to that is, I think AI really brings us a good opportunity. And I think definitely that's a new era. And I think we just have to adapt to that. In the same time, we also have to train our community or the people to put uncertainty in mind, in the same time to update your information from time to time to really bring in the joy of the AI era. Thank you.
All right, so to conclude our panel, I think once again to think about policy formation, not just the policy itself, scientific information, but how do you communicate such policy so it's credible, it's understandable, and it's actionable. So thank you guys for joining us, and thank you, Dr. Pottinger, Dr. Ma.
20 minutes to discuss very complex questions of geopolitics, but a fantastic couple of speakers for this last session today. Let me remind you the title of today's forum, Resilience, Risk and Reinvention, the Asia-Pacific in a Splintering World. And I'd highlight, and this is, sorry, it's a bad news piece here, that we are in a splintering world. We're in a world where the normal rules and structures of international relations, of economics are changing very rapidly. And so we've seen that in the last few years with an increase in interstate violence. You know, a Russian invasion of Ukraine that actually began 12 years ago with the annexation of Crimea and has really picked up in the last 4 years following the most recent incursion. Steve, you were serving at that time as US ambassador to Poland, one of the frontline states in NATO's eastern flank. I'd like to start with you giving us a few minutes on the geopolitical implications of both the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the current conflict in the Middle East, especially on how that's impacting Europe's perceptions of geopolitics.
Well, thanks, Michael. And I would just like to start off by thanking Shirley Lin and her superb team at CAPRI for organizing this conference. It's great to be back in Taipei. The world is splintering, but I find Taipei to be a beacon of hope. I know that may sound funny as we debate the various challenges that Taiwan faces, but I think there's a lot of good news here, and it's good to be reminded of that. Certainly, the conflicts in Ukraine and the current war in the Middle East have had a dramatic impact on the geopolitical situation. But at least as important is the role of the United States under the leadership of Donald Trump and how he has pursued U.S. policy in both of those conflicts. Certainly his, I think, ill-considered decision to start the war in Iran on February 28th, his abandonment of Ukraine just weeks into his second administration, his open flirtation with Vladimir Putin, his threats to seize Greenland from Denmark, his questioning of Canadian sovereignty, his national security policy, which identified social and cultural issues in Europe at least as an important a threat to the United States as the rivalry with China. So all of these taken together, the trade wars that have been a hallmark of his administration, have really caused an enormous doubt. Love him or hate him, he is the most consequential U.S. president in my lifetime, and we're trying to figure out what the implications of his policies will be. Certainly, immediately, NATO is facing its most serious crisis in 77 years of a very successful history as the most successful alliance of the modern era. People doubt the credibility of the United States to supply its security guarantee to Europe. That, in turn, has diminished U.S. deterrence, not only in Europe, but throughout the world, particularly in the Asia-Pacific region. Soft power, American soft power, is really in serious deficit. Working at the University of Virginia, every day I confront the challenges of heightened immigration barriers to attracting some of the world's best and brightest students to American shores. That has an impact. In Iran, in the Persian Gulf, the U.S. is arguably in worse strategic position than it was before the current war started. Iran is, despite not changing regimes, Iran now is governed by a more radical regime. The United States is facing this with, other than Israel, no real allies support. The damage done to the Persian Gulf energy infrastructure and the Persian Gulf economies has been incredibly consequential. The basis, I mean, the Persian Gulf allies with where we have had bases for many years are now quite causing them to question, is the United States presence a threat or protection? So, and in the meantime, Iran still possesses the highly enriched uranium, possibly capably a few weeks away from a bomb. And then there's the world energy crisis, the biggest disruption to energy in the modern era. So it sounds pretty depressing, but it's not all bad. The Trump administration's policies have served as a wake-up call to Europe that it's time to basically get serious about providing for its defense and defending its neighborhood. And that's been dramatically true in Ukraine, which is an inspiration. The fact that they have survived the Russian onslaught for now more than 12 years, as you pointed out, is really remarkable. And they are now producing all sorts of drones. They're really redefining the future of warfare. And this has also accelerated a move away from fossil fuels. So that too is something to be encouraged.
Thanks, Steve. Matt, I'm going to ask you the same question. Maybe you'll also react to some of the things that Steve has just put on the table here. But when you were serving in the White House as Deputy National Security Advisor, you're obviously thinking about these things, briefing the president on these things during the first Trump administration. Talk us through the geopolitical implications of these current crises and these current conflicts for the stability of peace and security in Asia Pacific, the relationships that the United States has with its allies in this part of the world. Yeah, so in many ways, it feels like this might be the most consequential year in geopolitics since 1989. And Ambassador Moll, you spent several tours in Poland, including as ambassador. 89 started as what looked like a normal year, right? Things were sort of stabilizing between President Reagan and Gorbachev. President Bush was sworn in early 1989. It seemed like things were going to be stable. Next thing you know, there was the Solidarity movement achieving success in Poland in terms of negotiating for a partially free election for the first time in decades. And that inspired student demonstrators in Beijing soon after that. And you had the Tiananmen Square protests put down violently, of course, in the Tiananmen massacre. But in Europe, the spark that was lit led to the fall of the Berlin Wall. Immense changes. Within 2 years, the Soviet Union was gone. 2 years after that, you had the birth of the European Union. 2 years after that, the World Trade Organization. So it's hard to know what trajectory we're on right now. We are facing multiple wars, as we discussed. President Trump, I think, believed that he could affect regime change in Iran. Historically, you can't bring about regime change through air power. You have to put hundreds of thousands, if not more, soldiers on the ground to do that kind of a thing, and I don't think there's any appetite in the United States for that. So we're probably in a much longer kind of a conflict in the Middle East now than people were bargaining for. Ukraine has been a very long conflict, more than a decade. But where I'm hopeful is that now that the stakes are so starkly laid out, it leads to a greater sense of seriousness. In Europe, you're starting to see more spending on defense than we've seen really at any point, certainly since the end of the Cold War. Japan is now doubling and perhaps even is going to triple its defense spending. Here in Taiwan, you have a major debate going on as we sit here about defense budgets and how much to increase them by and so forth. So I'm actually optimistic that that Ukraine will survive and win this war. I think that that the regime in Tehran, over a longer period of time, is going to have to face a reckoning with its own people. And I think that Taiwan, the people of Taiwan, as I interact with students and journalists and officials and people in all of the parties, there is a sense, sometimes not expressed publicly, but a sense that Taiwan has to get much more serious about taking its own defense into its hands so that it can negotiate with Beijing from a position of strength. So I'm optimistic that people still treasure their civil liberties, they treasure democracy, they treasure the prosperity that democracy has made possible in ways that ultimately may not lead to a 1989 type direction, but nonetheless, I'm not counting out democracy in the 21st century. I think that ultimately it may be strengthened. Thanks. We almost certainly agree on all of that. I also remain very optimistic about the prospects for the future. But let's bring the focus down to the near future and ask the question that everybody hates being asked. But Steve, I'm going to come back to you. We seem to be in a situation right now where every day there's a different flavor of the war in the Middle East? Do we have a ceasefire? Is there a blockade?
Several times a day.
Sometimes several times a day. Talk us through the next few months. How do you see? I mean, you were actually working on this issue of the nuclear program for the State Department with Iran. What's your sense of how this unfolds? Is it a matter of weeks? Is it a matter of months? Is this a long-running conflict? Are we going to see the Iran conflict essentially resemble the Ukraine conflict? Is this a decade-long process we're looking at here?
What an easy question you asked. No, when thinking about the direction of the current conflict, I often think of going back into history. A French police minister, Joseph Forchet, once quoted after Napoleon ordered the kidnapping and execution of a nobleman who was opposing him. And Minister Forchet said, "Oh, this was worse than a crime. It was a mistake." And trying to figure out a way out of what I think was a mistaken decision to go to war is a problem. And as you pointed out, the Trump administration has laid out several different conditions which have often changed, sometimes in the same day. I see there are perhaps 5 scenarios based on what the president has said himself since this conflict began. One is that Iran just gives up and caves. Well, I don't think that's a realistic option. I mean, I think the U.S. and others in the region have been surprised by the staying power of the Iranian regime. Another scenario is that President Trump just declares victory, walks away, leaves the situation in the Strait of Hormuz, leaves that for other people to solve. I don't think that is a politically popular outcome. I think now that President Trump is committed to somehow sorting this problem out, I think walking away isn't going to be an option for him. The third option is resumption of full war. But I think for the reasons that Matt suggested, that involves, inevitably escalation, putting more troops on the ground in an election year. That's not very popular. I think there could be a negotiated compromise between the United States and Iran, affecting the Strait of Hormuz, affecting the nuclear program. Just yesterday, President Trump said that we're just days away from a possible agreement. I don't think that that's very likely. The nuclear question is very complicated. The JCPOA took almost 2 years to negotiate, and Iran feels emboldened by its position. It feels like it has drawn to a stalemate with the United States, and Trump is projecting an image that he wants to finish this as soon as possible. And so I think that has the impact of making the Iranians harder line in terms of their demands of what they would want to see an agreement to feature. So I think that leaves the last option of the current scenario, the blockage of the Strait of Hormuz with dual blockades, the Iranians blocking and we blocking the Iranians. And it's basically come down to a contest between us and Iran, who has a higher tolerance for pain. I saw reports today of an intelligence assessment from the United States that Iran could survive without incurring significant economic pain for at least 3 more months. Whether President Trump has the stomach to take 3 more months of rising gas prices as the elections draw nearer, I think is open to question. But I think that's the most realistic outcome. Now, that does open the possibility for another power to step in to try and resolve the Strait of Hormuz issue. Europe or China could, I think most people in the world would welcome another power stepping in and trying to broker a solution. And what that could be, is an agreement that tolls still need to be paid to transit the Strait of Hormuz, but not to Iran, but to rather a collection of all of the states, the littoral states, in the Persian Gulf, and then use that as a fund to pay for reconstruction. So I think that's the most hopeful outcome. After a time, it's not acceptable to have international waterways be, you have to pay a toll to get through them. So after time, if that is a final outcome, that ultimately should be removed and restored free passage.
Quick follow-up on that. Which external power would Iran positively respond to? If you play out your scenario of an EU-driven or a China-driven resolution, will Tehran accept that?
Well, I think Tehran would prefer China, given its closer relationship. But I think Europe has now suffered enough distance from the United States in all of this that I think it would have certainly more credibility than the U.S. would have.
Can I ask that same question of you, Matt? I mean, you've been tracking China's leadership for a long time. Do you think it's in China's interests to push a resolution for the current conflict in the Middle East? Or does China actually benefit from having the United States bogged down in order to achieve other objectives that Beijing is trying to achieve?
Yes.
Expand on that,
Both
please.
things are true. I think Beijing is uneasy with a war that, if it goes on long enough, could have pretty significant shock effects on the Chinese economy. Beijing has the world's famously largest strategic petroleum reserves, but they're not bottomless. And so at the same time, Beijing would like to see an outcome that weakens American prestige and power. And so Beijing's doing both things at once. I think they're trying to nudge things towards reopening Hormuz, even as they send weapons and targeting intelligence to Iran to try to sink American warships and the like. So both things are true. I think Beijing is very concerned, though, because Beijing pursued a strategy in the Middle East that was not unlike the American pre-1979 strategy in the Middle East. Before 1979, before the revolution that led to this horrific regime in Iran, the U.S. had a three-pillar strategy of good relations with Israel, good relations with the Arab states, Egypt and Saudi Arabia, and also good relations with Tehran. And after that, it became a two-pillar strategy. Beijing long cultivated a three-pillar strategy. Beijing now has terrible relations with Israel because Beijing backed Hamas, the terrorist organization that did its worst, killing more than 1,000 civilians in Israel in October of 2023. Beijing provided propaganda support through TikTok, provided diplomatic cover for them. So that's now in tatters. If the regime in Tehran falls, they're going to be in an even worse position than the U.S. was back in 1979. So I think Beijing's nervous. I think they're a bit anxious about how things are proceeding right now.
Okay.
I think this war could go on for a long time. In the Middle East, wars sometimes never really end. They kind of go hot and then cool again. You could argue that this war began in 1979 when Tehran declared that it was going to wipe Israel off the map and then go after the Great Satan, as they called it, the United States. And this is a regime that gunned down 40,000 of its own civilians earlier this year. So I don't think we can predict what the ultimate fate is going to be for this regime.
But it sounds like both of you are in a position that there's no real plausible short-term resolution here. We're talking about a period of months before.
I would be amazed if Tehran agrees to negotiate away its enrichment program. I hope that happens, but I've seen nothing to suggest that they'd be willing to do that. So I think in some form or another, whether it's cooler or hotter, this conflict will continue.
Would you agree on the nuclear piece, Steve?
I do agree. For whatever reason, some people plausibly suggest that Iran clings to an enrichment program because it wants to build a nuclear weapon. Others suggest there are historic reasons going back to Iran's relationships with the French. They gave the French $1 billion to supply enriched uranium fuel for their nuclear nuclear energy program. And then after 1979, French kept the money and didn't provide any fuel. And so, who knows? There are certainly people in Iran, more so now, who want a nuclear weapon because they see what happens to you if you don't have a nuclear weapon. But I think they have decided that they believe they have a right to enrich. The United States doesn't recognize that right, but they have identified that as a core national priority, and they're willing to endure a lot of pain to stick to it.
Thanks. Matt, I'm going to come back to you for a related question. Again, put yourself in the mind of Xi Jinping for a moment. You're in Beijing. You're looking at this war in Ukraine for the last 4 years during this more intense phase. You're looking at the current conflict in the Middle East. To what extent does Xi Jinping take advantage, or what lessons does he draw from these current conflicts in terms of how he's thinking about Chinese coercion against Taiwan?
I think there's some good evidence that Xi Jinping was surprised and concerned by how badly Russia performed in the intensive phase of its war launched in February 2022, right? You remember when many months after the war began, Vladimir Putin sat down with Xi Jinping and the camera was rolling. And Vladimir Putin said, "I know you've got lots of concerns," right? And then the camera got pushed out. I think the concerns were not that Vladimir Putin was waging war on his neighbor. That was always part of the plan. Beijing was in on that, right? They signed a no-limits pact right on the eve of the full-blown invasion of Ukraine. I think safely assume that Xi Jinping was concerned with how badly the war was going for Russia, and that's still true today. This should give Taiwan some confidence, because in 2 wars now against superpowers, the middling states are holding their own. In the case of Ukraine, whose prospects look so bad that the US government shut down its embassy in Kiev and asked the president of Ukraine, "Hey, do you want us to give you safe harbor in the United States?" And he said, "No, I'm going to fight." And here we are more than 4 years later, and they're incredibly, Ukraine is protecting the entirety of the Western Hemisphere right now, right? Europe and the United States, with their bravery and innovation and grit. So the Russian Navy was sent, a big part of it was sent to the bottom of the Black Sea by Ukrainians who basically did remote-controlled jet skis with explosives, strapped to these things. And then you look in the case of Iran. Iran has kept the United States Navy more or less far from the Persian Gulf. The U.S. is only in a few cases in the last 10 weeks has the U.S. dared to transit the Strait of Hormuz because of the threat of these asymmetric weapons, drones, on-the-sea drones, undersea drones, coastal defense cruise missiles. These things are not that expensive, right? But this should give Taiwan some confidence, because all of these new technologies favor defenders, right? It doesn't favor aggressors. It favors the defender. And if 2 superpower navies have been kept at bay, that should be good news for Taiwan. But only if Taiwan actually spends the money, does the work, invites Ukrainian and other experts to come to Taiwan and show them how to build a capacity to build these drones and missiles and cruise missiles and the like. The United States is not that power. It's actually Ukraine. Ukraine this year is going to build 12 million drones. 12 million drones this year. The entire United States, for both commercial and military use, might make 300,000 drones this year. So your friends are these other powers that have now proven that they can defend themselves against superpowers. Iran is not one of those, but you can still learn some things from the Iranians at a distance. I wouldn't invite them here.
Thanks, Matt. We don't have a lot of time left, so let me ask a final question, and you can kind of have the last words here. Steve, I'm going to start with you, and then Matt. And I want to bring us back again to the theme of the conference here today. You've already started to take us down this pathway a little bit, Matt. What are the lessons that each of you would give to national leaders from the current geopolitical context that we're in about how to prepare their countries, their societies for these potential existential challenges that might come in the years ahead? Steve, I'll start with you.
Well, the lesson number one is the world is obviously a much more dangerous and unpredictable place. So it's incumbent upon every national leader, whatever their size or geographic location, to worry about their own defense. And to use, Matt's example of Ukraine is absolutely right. To use innovation, to use all of the tools of a modern society to develop a flexible, a coherent defense policy to defend, and then supplement that with developing an interlocking web with similar countries in your neighborhood, with friends with similar interests. Taiwan has parlayed its strength in chip in semiconductors remarkably well, and so I think all of these things are really important for every country to look at. Follow CAPRI. CAPRI's studies and policy recommendations for how to improve resilience is exactly what every society should be doing.
Thank you. Matt?
So one that we discussed, which is that these new technologies favor defenders, right? Taiwan is not dreaming of invading China, right? So this is a time when Taiwan needs to build its own capacity, help from Ukraine, help from Israel, help from countries that now have a proven capability to build layered defensive systems. Another lesson from these two wars is that offensive strike capability is also important, right? The Arab states that were attacked by Iran, even though they hadn't entered the war, yet they were attacked by Iran, all of them. It was Israeli and American offensive strikes that did more to roll back the threat of missiles and drones than as opposed to just relying on interceptors and defensive weapons. So Taiwan should be a porcupine, but one that can, has sharp claws too and long arms. I think also that, again, deterrence means having a capability to defend yourself and also the demonstrated resolve to defend yourself. As people in Taiwan politics are talking about negotiations with China, I don't have any problem with that. But you want to do that from a position of strength. And that means building a defense industrial base in Taiwan that can iterate, innovate, update, and adapt these technologies quickly. The war that's going on in Ukraine, the Ukrainians change their drone technology and their counter-drone technology every few weeks, okay? And Taiwan right now is having these discussions about what do we want to buy in 3 years, right? Taiwan needs to be able to emulate that ecosystem that Ukraine has to be able to update and adapt those technologies rapidly, rather than just relying on large weapons purchases several years in the future.
Great. I'm going to wrap this up by just highlighting a couple of words. The importance of innovation, part of CAPRI's name, and also the importance of working with friends and partners and allies. And on that note, please join me with a round of applause for Stephen Mull and Matt Pottinger. Thank you, Shirley. Thank you, Capri, for getting me here. Thank you for making me part of the audience to listen to this great discussion. No thank you for getting me here to conclude this rich discussion, because it's an extremely difficult job to do. The kind of talks we've had through the day. I'm also amazed at this platform you've put up with the bright young minds sitting here, the students you've got in here. It's, I think, one of the rare public forums where you get such a wide audience, which our excellent speakers can address. It's a privilege for all of us to be here to talk to them. By conclusion, I'd first start by saying, people of my generation lived in a fairy tale world. We lived in a fairy tale world because we were naive. We believed the world was without borders, and that science, technology, progress were apolitical things. People exchange ideas. It was one big happy family. This was all taken for granted. Science spoke the same language no matter where it was. People collaborated. Innovation grew. And that world turned out to be a fairy tale. But that world created these supply chains where, trade flourished, smooth as silk, continents got wound together and became one. Interdependence became a fact of life. And we heard today that that world is being tested, and being tested violently, time and time again. Technology itself is now sitting at that very brutal intersection, ruled by the gatekeepers of commerce, ruled by the gatekeepers of security. It's a paranoid world which finds itself hostage. Innovation itself feels strangulated. So in a world of competition, which is, kind of being driven by pure assertion, the fact is, the truth is that the world has been here before too. It's not that this is happening for the first time. But communities, and nations, and we are precisely in one such place. They rose, they prospered when they transcended this world. They collapsed when they were overtaken by it. And this beautiful island, Formosa, as you said, which means beautiful, is a prime example of what it did in the 70s, when it felt constrained, when it felt the world had given up on it. It reinvented itself. It made itself that node of interdependence, which no one could do without. And that was a victory of this place. So today the wheel may have turned again. We moved into a different kind of world. And what the world started calling the centrality of Formosa today is seen by many as an exposure, as a vulnerability. Which brings us to the question that I think we were discussing today: how do we rewire innovation? How do we get back? How do we rethink the rules of global collaboration, without which we will not be able to sustain innovation? And the answer actually begins with the truth, older than silicon, far older. It traveled with the caravanserais which spread knowledge. And the basic fact is, as we have heard, that through the history of power, knowledge has expanded when it is shared, not when it is constrained. It has been the only form of wealth that spreads most when it is given away. That is how it grows. And it also underlies the biggest paradox that is at the heart of the 21st century. Knowledge no longer merely travels. The knowledge today compounds exponentially. We're in a world of Claude, we're in a world of ChatGPT, we're in a world of AI. Every idea feeds not just human minds. It feeds interconnected systems, machines, data sets, trained capabilities that scale. Intelligence is no longer just cultivated. It's not just cultivated in human minds, It is iterated across machines, across systems. So this is a different world. So the paradox sharpens here when you talk of innovation, we start talking of knowledge, and we talk of the world we live in today. See, the power to harness this knowledge is not evenly distributed. So there is the problem. It is restrained by the power to commute. It is restrained by who owns data, who owns capital. And control of platforms and data concentrate knowledge in unprecedented ways. So the debate actually is not between openness and control. It is about what to protect, where to draw the line, when to let go and redraw it. And it needs to happen again and again. Look at Hormuz. We were discussing the Straits of Hormuz. 20% of the world's oil, 30% of the world's helium transits these straits. And it's not just oil. One drone can finish the supplies of helium and make the fabs go dark. So no matter, you like it or don't like it, we are interdependent, we are connected. We can't run away from that basic fact. So the world will continue to run on rules of interdependence, no matter what happens. But instead of that, we find ourselves in a world where interdependency itself has become a choke point. That is the problem. Whether it is, Hormuz, whether it is sanctions, whether it is use of the interbanking system, one side uses geographical choke points, the other side actually fired the first shot by using interdependency of technology. The SWIFT system, sanctions, these also became choke points. So the other side started retaliating against this. And Hormuz came into reality. So what does one do when we get into this world? So the crisis in the Strait of Hormuz is beyond regional war. That's what we really heard in the last session. How do we get out of it? We've seen a collision of rules take place here. And these are the rules of maritime, the maritime rules which have been built over the years. These rules collide with each other. New rules of the road will have to be made. Do we ultimately, we discuss something like this, have a kind of Monterey Convention of 1936, which reestablishes some kind of order in this? To conclude, I'll talk about what does not ChatGPT tell us, what does ancient wisdom tell us, much before ChatGPT. The ancients gave us various stories. They gave us the Mahabharata. They gave us the Odyssey. They gave us also the story of the Monkey King, which is very well known in these parts. What are these stories about? These stories fundamentally tell us that with great power comes great responsibility. And ultimately, with great power also comes the idea of restraint. Odysseus had to be tied to the mast, had to be consented to be tied to the mast, to understand that power lies in restraint at the right time. The Monkey King had to wear the headband. And he wore the headband, went on the travel, accompanied by the pilgrim whom he was guarding. And the pilgrim was going to get the sutras, the rules, the new rules of the road, which had to come into being. But the new rules were not important. The Monterey Convention is not important. The headband was the cardinal rule, which the Monkey King wore. And that is fundamentally which changed things. When does the pain of the headband, the pain of the choke point, become so strong that power realizes the value of restraint? Whoever is exercising that power, wherever that power is being exercised to that choke point. So what we are saying, why are the negotiations not working? Today we see that Matt told us that the small is not just beautiful, small has power. What do the small powers do? What do they do in this situation? Do they have no agency? Whereas the big need to control agency, the smaller ones need to exercise that agency. And how do they exercise it? By building
Professor Barroso told us, by building within themselves, through regional organizations, through different rules of the road, they become the headband, they become the restraining power, which ultimately they become part of that journey. They are the monks without the navies. They are the monks which teach that restraint. They are the monks which teach what happens when the pain starts hurting. So we are reaching that stage. I do not know when we will reach it. None of us know when we will reach it. But these are the only solutions which really matter. So the mask and the headband are really what matter. And I think we're going to be reaching that stage. It's been a great conference. Great ideas have been thrown up. Thank you all for getting me here. And thank you, all of you. And last of all, please, a great applause for the splendid team at CAPRI. Where are they? They're all around us. For making this possible, for getting us all here, and pulling off an amazing conference. Thank you so much.